Hello and welcome to the Centre for Independent Studies. I'm Glenn Fahey, Research Fellow here at CIS. With Sydney plunged back into lockdown and schools returning to home-based learning, this conversation couldn't be more timely. Technology has been playing an increasing role well before the pandemic hit, and has become a critical element in the lives of teachers, students and administrators. Like other industries, technological innovation promises to make schooling more effective, efficient and equitable. Proponents say more and better use of technology can lift outcomes for students and improve the work of educators. Others say it's not technology that's the problem, but how we're using it. To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined by an exceptional panel. Jamie Beaton is CEO and co-founder of Crimson Education and president of Crimson Global Academy. Wayne Houlden is vice chairman and founder of Janison Education Group. And John Hattie is Laurette Professor at Melbourne Graduate School of Education and Chair of the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership. Jamie, Wayne and John, welcome to the CIS.
Yeah, good to be here.
John, I want to go to you first here. The pandemic clearly showed us that we had a rapid adoption and use of technology for home-based learning. What did the response of schools and educators teach us about the state of technology in education?
Well, certainly it took 50 years, but now every teacher virtually uses technology. It's kind of like the wallpaper. And so it's a good stage to now we can move on to asking the more important question that is about the effective use of it. Certainly during COVID, whilst there was a magnification of a lot of equity issues, the overall effects are starting to come out. Overall, on average, well-being went up for the majority of kids. For the ones that went down, it went down quite dramatically. Many students did very well in terms of both effectiveness and the other word you use, Glenn, efficiency, much more efficient using the technology. Some students are saying, I can do in 2 hours at home what takes me 5 hours at school. I think that's a realisation about the power of what happened through the distance COVID line of thinking. Teachers had to stop talking. You can't talk for 89% of the time and ask 200 questions that require less than 3 words response. You have to listen. You have to listen to the students. That's the power of technology in action. And kids were more willing to talk about what they didn't know using the social media than they typically do in a classroom. So I think there's a lot of good learning. Here's the problem, Glenn. We rush back to the old normal so fast. We'll rush back to the old questions about should there be technology or not, which has been a pretty futile question. So I just hope we use this COVID opportunity as a positive way to answer and ask the right questions.
Wayne, just as schools had to pivot when it came to online instruction through the pandemic period, so too was there a need to adapt when it came to assessment and building more fit-for-purpose assessment as well. The organisation that you founded was responsible for providing a Checkin assessment, a novel instrument. What need did that fill and how was that received by educators and policymakers?
Glenn, we've been working with the New South Wales Department of Education for nearly 10 years on digital assessment. So our connection with them goes back a long way. And they first built an assessment online called the Essential Science Assessment for secondary school students. And from that, the relationship and the skills that they've been developing sort of extended through the years. So Checkin actually was largely inspired by a recent program they built called Best Start. And Best Start has been going for a couple of years now in New South Wales. It runs in Year 7 in Term 1. It's a reading and a numeracy test that provides a diagnostic for teachers on students starting high school. So it gives them an idea about what their skill sets are at the beginning of Year 7. And so when COVID hit, New South Wales was able to pivot really quickly to build a Checkin assessment. And that Checkin assessment was an opt-in test for schools to help identify learning gaps caused by the disruptions to the school program because of COVID. And it ran in Year 2, Year 3, Year 4, Year 5, Year 6, Year 8 and Year 9 in Term 3. Probably what was interesting was they were able to put that together in a really small amount of time. It wasn't a mandatory test, it was opt-in, but nearly 2,000 New South Wales schools took it up. About 380 students took tests, and it was offered over a 3-week window. So it was hugely successful, I think. feedback from the assessment seems to be positive across, a wide set of interest groups, from the schools, the teachers, the unions, school leaders, and politicians as well. So it's seen as being quite a success. This year, it's actually been extended. It's running now twice a year in term 2 and term 4, and from years 2 all the way up to year 9. So, largely it's been an example of where an organisation's been able to build on the skills that they've already built over a period of time and really deliver something quite effective very quickly.
Jamie, Crimson Global Academy was conceived and commenced before the pandemic, but of course, so it's not a response directly to the conditions of home-based learning or online schooling, but can you tell us a bit about the Academy and what drives students to it?
Sure. So if you think about a lot of students in traditional schools, they're really underserved in terms of personalized learning, where students can learn at the speed of their own ability. So if you think about a typical student, maybe they can be 1 year ahead in math, but in every other subject, there's very limited options for them to challenge themselves and go at actually a faster pace. We see many, actually thousands of really ambitious students from more than 20 countries across Crimson. And what we saw is this constant, appetite for students to challenge themselves and go a bit faster. And so for a while, we were kind of servicing that need through extra tutoring or recommendations of other self-study programs. But as we came across the opportunity to really launch our own online high school, that provided a credential and structured way for our students to go through this accelerated path. So I think of our alumni like, say, Tristan Pang, who finished his A-level math when he was 13. Now he's an Oxford PhD at age 17. And obviously that's a pretty extreme example, but I think many students can be getting through, as John said, 5 years of content in 2 years. And so families are sort of jumping on that, seeing the comparative efficiency of, this type of program versus their traditional bricks and mortar school, and then making that call to jump in.
So what sort of lessons has that mainstream use of online schooling through the pandemic period, what's that meant for Crimson Global Academy? And do you think that it's eased some of the possible mishap or apprehension that students and families might have toward online schooling?
Yeah, definitely. I think prior to the pandemic, if you mention like full-time online high school, let's say New Zealand or Australia, you might get some confused looks because, it's shocking the idea that a student wouldn't be sort of playing some sport or participating in orchestra in their physical school. Now, the reality is most of our students are using this as a part-time supplement to their physical skills. There's really no loss of any of those physical interactions. But also, most kids sitting in a physical classroom aren't necessarily highly engaged. In a 30-person class that isn't very personalized to them, they're not necessarily being caught on a challenge in a physical class. Within our online classes, it's much smaller class size, Hartman-style discussion methods. And so the students are forced to engage, speak, prepare, and respond. And so they actually have to interact a lot more with their peers than they would in the traditional, quite static classroom environment. So I think, long story short, this has normalized this for many parents because they've seen some of the benefits just through their physical school. And they see that, with our, focused approach, being a purely online school provider, they sort of see that could play a role in the child's learning journey.
So much of the discussion of the past 15 months or so has centred around the issue of learning losses with school closures. And of course, there's been mixed evidence about where learning losses are at and to the extent that they've been experienced. CIS research, for instance, suggested quite modest but widely felt losses during the time of home-based learning. Other data points like the NAPLAN Checkin assessments suggest there was very little learning progress for students while schools were closed. Other international research suggests the same, but of course there's observations as well of the opposite. So John, how does that square with your observation from the wider literature of limited evidence of digital technology bringing educational benefits to date?
Well, there's been over 250 meta-analyses, 16,000 studies, 6 million kids since 1976. And the average effect has not changed from a very low effect, despite massive changes in technology. So it's the revolution that's been coming for 50 years. And when I start to see some of the research coming out from COVID, the first meta-analysis came out from Klaus Zara, an average effect of -0.1, which any school can pick up very, very quickly. I think learning losses, quite frankly, Glenn, it's an insulting word to use. It emphasises the incredible skills and expertise of teachers to minimise that loss. In fact, from the New Zealand study with 5 million kids, maths went up slightly, reading went down slightly, writing went down a lot, I think for reasons we'll understand. So the first message I'd make is that let's be cautious about using the word learning loss. I think it underestimates what teachers did. I think teachers learned a tremendous amount about how to teach using technology. And that's the big theme that I push, is it's about how you teach. If you teach in the traditional grammar of schooling, it's no surprise that 200 meta-analyses have found it's hardly made a difference. But if you take the stance like Jamie is taking and Wayne's starting, that let's look at it from the centrality of the child. Let's look at finding ways that we can use the technology to help in teaching the students to be their own teachers. Along with the teachers, you can get some quite marked advances. But our debates have been so sterile over the years about how we add technology. It's like when I was a kid, the most dramatic thing was moving from fountain pens to biros. They were banned from schools because they had evil influences. And we know when TV came in, technology's come in. Now, the biggest effect, positive effect, I would argue, of technology is social media. And that's something that we still ban in our schools. Kids are more likely to talk about the errors they make on social media that they won't say to the teacher in the physical classroom. They're more likely to engage with other students in the process of learning. They're more likely to think aloud. They're more likely to get the teacher to think aloud and hear they're doing it. And these are the kind of things I'd love to see built back. Now, whether you do it through Jamie's model, where they have a school dedicated this way, or whether you bring it back to a traditional school. But until we start talking about the teaching, we're not going to have any effect of the technology. And when you do talk about the teaching and talk about how it can be really make a difference to kids' lives, then technology fits in beautifully.
So why is it that we have such that consistent finding of different technologies, but in large part, minus the few examples that you've cited, why has it been such a robust, consistent finding? Is it just because we've not had the second piece of that, the adoption and integration into effective instruction? Is that what you put it down to?
It's the wrong way around, Glenn. We don't want it to adopt it into instruction. Like Larry Cuban has done the most exciting work. He's an historian from Stanford. And one of his findings is that over the last 150 years, 80% of teachers teach in the same way they did 150 years ago, which is not necessarily a bad thing. 10 to 15% are innovative and do it more efficiently, and 5 to 10% do it really in dramatically different ways. Now, take that into account. If that 80%, the grammar of schooling is teachers talk a lot, 90% of the time. Teachers ask 150 to 200 questions a day, requiring less than 3 words response from the kids. That's the traditional grammar of schooling. It's no surprise that technology doesn't make much difference. But if you turn it on its head, like we did in COVID, if Jamie ran a lesson in his school where the teacher talked for 89% of the time and asked 200 questions requiring less than 3 words response by some of the kids, it would be a disaster. He has to go to triage. He has to listen. He has to help the students listen to how they're thinking. It's a dramatic difference. So we've got to start with the nature of the teaching, and then technology can make a difference. But if you start with the technology, it's the wrong way to go.
Jamie, why might Crimson Global Academy, as a purpose-built online school, demonstrate the opposite outcome when it comes to students performing better in an online environment?
So I guess the first thing that I would say about online schooling is there's a just black and white divide around the amount of data you can capture from the learning experience in an online classroom versus a physical one. So in a physical classroom, you might have the teacher examine, you might have, say, a headmaster or head of department examine a classroom and, go in for an inspection to see how the teacher's teaching. You might get some feedback on how the students are doing through assessments and things like this. In our online classroom, after every lesson, you can see talk time by student. You can see who hasn't contributed in the class, how their engagement is trending over the week by subject, by other learners like them. You can also look at things like, for example, how quickly are students getting feedback on their essays, or who's not engaging in class quizzes during the classroom experience itself. So I don't necessarily think the platform of online is what makes this great. I think it's the fact that the data that you get out of that learning experience and the ability for online to enable scale, that then drives this experience. So there are a couple of examples on the data side. Now on the scale side, like many things in life, as you get things to kind of a critical scale, you can do a lot of unique things that you can't do when something's a lot smaller. So your traditional physical school, say 800 kids, 1,000 kids maybe, they can't offer all the subjects you want at the speed students may want. There's limitations on extracurricular things like this. With online, suddenly you can have opportunities for students to aggregate in sufficient scale to offer all kinds of personalized learning streams, different subjects that a physical school couldn't do. And so, I would point to both data and the benefits of scale and aggregation of these niche learner profiles into collective groups as two of the main drivers of value in an online high schooler environment.
And so, Wayne, Jamie's indicated there that some of that benefit with a purpose-built online instruction, that can build in the assessment tools that suit that environment. What are some of the ways that online assessment space is introducing new methods for feeding back better information to teachers?
Well, I think one of the things that online assessments are really good at doing, or there's a number of things that online assessments are really good at doing. One is they can really speed the planning and delivery of assessments compared to paper. And I think in general, I'm speaking about assessments that are more system-based rather than individual school-based, because from our perspective, we see digital assessments as being something that operates most effectively when you've got a large group of schools that are taking those assessments. So speed of planning and delivery for online assessments is a really positive capability when it comes to online. Being able to increase the control of delivery, have an increased control of delivery, but also be able to audit the activity during tests is also a big difference between online and paper. Being able to reduce the cost of delivery and being able to have a massive reduction in the use of resources as well is really important. And then being able to better protect the test content and to be able to better secure student responses. There's a big difference between what online can do compared to paper-based assessments in that respect.
Yes. Sorry. Do you think that this experience of we've obviously had that rapid response of introducing, of course, online instruction, online assessment, has that easing an already existing trend to openness from teachers to use more online assessment tools?
I think there's still some way to go in terms of teachers' use of online assessments. I think in general they're often guided by their institutions or by their systems in with regards to those tools. There's obviously a lot more formative assessment, digital assessments now available, and that's a significant component for schools as well. But when it comes to those larger systemic assessments, they're still driven very, very much by the systems themselves in terms of the planning and the rollout of those. From that perspective, those environments, there's some really important aspects of how those environments can really save costs in terms of that delivery process, but also be able to provide more meaningful results as well. So a lot of this is around thinking about the development process of the assessments themselves and putting in the right amount of effort and research into what an effective assessment is and how to make sure that assessment captures the results that you're looking for, and then is able to provide the analysis of those results and the analytics to actually to make a difference back in the school environment.
John, what are teachers' needs when it comes to assessment tools that are perhaps not being met in the pen and paper form that online can answer?
Well, firstly, sometimes we underestimate that of all professions, teachers are probably the biggest users of social media. And we're certainly capitalised on it in our HSL role, and getting teachers are prepared to communicate and talk with each other. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is we actually invented the assessment school for primary and high school for the New Zealand system. And it's a voluntary system, and it's absolutely based on interpretation. And the way in which technology can help do the interpretation for the kids and the teachers. In the system, there's hardly a number, because so often when kids get a number or teachers get a number, they think that's the end. And so I think that the biggest push is going to be when we use the AI, the whole systems out there to really help teachers with interpretation. And what we're most proud of is that given it's voluntary, 80% of teachers and schools are using that voluntary tool 20 years after it was implemented. It's never been in the media. Most reporters never heard about it. But I think this is the kind of thing that the technology is doing that sometimes we forget. We keep thinking it's about kids using it. we're doing a lot of work at the moment on the feedback engine and helping technology help improve the amount of feedback. Like, here's a problem for kids. They get feedback, particularly publicly. There is a reputation at stake here. Sometimes the kids below the average get confirmation they're below the average. So it can have barriers on their expectations. If you give them feedback without praise, then particularly via a computer, the computer doesn't know that you're the ADHD kid or you're the kid that's got this, that, or the other thing. The computer doesn't know that you got it wrong 3 times before. It doesn't care that you ask it 5 times and to go rehearse and deliberately practice. I think these are the kind of things that we can augment. We've developed a tool, Visible Classrooms, where just by turning on your iPhone, turning on the app, it will give you, straight at the end of a lesson, a transcript of everything you've said and analytics straight away. Brightpaths is probably one of the best tools I've seen in assessment out of West Australia, which is stunning in the way it helps teachers help in their moderation and understand their thinking. And my point is, this is the kind of thing that technology is going to truly make a difference to the technology. And as Wayne is hinting, and let me be specific, and to do that for the students, surely the data belongs to the students. Surely we have an obligation to teach them how to interpret it and get beyond the numbers. And that's where technology can make a dramatic difference.
Jamie, we're talking here about sort of the role of teachers here more so than students again. And so it's true that for Crimson Global Academy, it's not just about improving that student experience, but is it also an alternative model for teachers that might be wanting maybe a more flexible approach to teaching that gives them that small group environment or to use a specialty? Is that the sort of thing that is attracting teachers to work with Crimson and Global Academy as well?
Yeah, totally. So if you think about, modern teaching, it's very restrictive because every day you've got to live, within a certain geographic radius of a school to, migrate to. So if you're, for example, a high school in a, certain suburb of, say, Auckland or Sydney, you have to literally recruit people that are willing to live near there or, migrate there. And so there's a real geographic barrier around who you can source for the school. In this case, our faculty, we've got folks in Spain and Costa Rica and remote parts of New Zealand living on lifestyle blocks. And that flexibility lets them, actually focus on the teaching and, cuts out a lot of commuting time every day and also lets them actually engage with really interesting colleagues from far-flung parts of the world, and that can actually add a lot of richness to their, experience, professional development, and familiarity with different types of students and cultures. So a CGA teacher can be based in Waiheke Island in New Zealand and be working with kids in Russia and China and Australia. And that is, awesome. And then also, I guess, just from a pure cost structure perspective, if they can earn, competitive or higher salaries teaching online, but cut a lot of those, typical commuting costs, it's also more economical for them too. So I think, it's fantastic for the teacher. And also it means we can, draw on from, top teachers from many, many countries. We've got faculty from, the US, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. And that just broadens the pool a lot. So we can be far more selective with who we bring on board.
I'd like to touch on the issues around technology, not just a solution for effectiveness and efficiency that we've been talking about so far, but also as a solver in equity issues. And so, Wayne, with the sort of increased access to technology-supported assessment, does that help to level the playing field when it comes to access to great assessment tools as well? That is, in the case of if we're purely going to teachers' assessment, of course, there's going to be limitations in how teachers can assist students with additional needs to the average person in the classroom. So is it a playing field leveler then?
I think to some extent it is. I mean, I think we're a long way away from having a level playing field, but at least using online assessment does have a role to play and does play a role in doing that. Widespread adoption of online assessment really has helped encourage schools to think and plan effective digital strategies, not just for devices, but also for internet access, resiliency of that internet access and Wi-Fi connectivity in schools. There's nothing quite like the fact that you're going to be using that technology to take either mid-stakes or even high-stakes assessments. That really does encourage the schools to make sure that they've got those plans and those strategies properly defined and properly implemented. And so from that perspective, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, that from that perspective, it's definitely helping to improve in across the board the sorts of technology that's in play or available inside schools. I think that's going to increase as well because, for example, I know in not too far in the future, we're going to be running selective school exams digitally online in schools in New South Wales. And so there'll be a big emphasis on making sure that the technology is up to scratch for that. If we continue to build and improve on our types of assessments that we deliver in schools, then that will also drive further investment in digital devices and digital technology inside schools, and that will be a good thing as well. Right now, online assessment doesn't really ask a lot of a digital device. Most assessments can run on a tablet or a laptop or a desktop. Most assessments don't use sound, they're just using images, animation, maybe some low fidelity video. But, there's also now a number of emerging assessments which do use sound or do use interaction, do record speech, require more secure connections, things like that. So they're helping to drive the adoption of technology in schools as well. And I think COVID's had a big role to play in this as well. As I think John mentioned at the beginning, I think Victoria loaned about 48,000 laptops to students last year. Queensland loaned school laptops to disadvantaged students as well. Other countries have been buying large amounts of laptops for students as well. So there's definitely been a much more of a focus on technology in the last 2 years.
And Jamie, we often talk about with Crimson the focus on that very high end of students that are exceptional and academically gifted. Is it also not the case that also the other end of the distribution could be well served with online schooling options? That is, students that might have limited access to specialist teachers or might need that the extra time and attention of a smaller group that might not be possible to accommodate in some schools. How can online schooling be a solution for equity as well as one for excellence?
So we're really seeing great adoption, particularly within our full-time online high school offering of students from quite a varied learning background. If you think about the model, it's class sizes of typically 8 to 15 students where you're encouraged to participate every class, and you're also streamed into classes based on ability, following our diagnostics as you go into the school. So I think what's very disengaging for a student is sitting in a class when there's a bunch of students far ahead of them and they don't feel they can effectively contribute, or vice versa. And so in this environment, you have classes of kids of curated, ability levels. They've got more contact time with the teacher, and they're typically speaking a lot more as well, building that confidence in that safer environment. Some of the social anxiety for physical school is also removed by an online, class as well. Some of our students do comment on that too. So I think absolutely this can be an effective delivery style for some learners, across the spectrum. Also from an access perspective, beyond just academic outcome equity, from a, financial equity perspective, we're seeing many families join us who traditionally haven't engaged with any private schools, but because this is quite unbundled and they can take a couple of subjects in the subjects most critical, and they don't have to pay for, maintenance of rugby field or, an expensive art studio or something, they can actually access great quality schooling at a much lower price. So I think, both across, academic outcomes and also, financial access, online schooling does pose a number of benefits.
So I'll take a question from our audience here from Sam. Sam asks, would the digital divide be an inhibitor to rolling out technology at scale? Jamie, it seems to me that the students that could most benefit are those that are most remotely located, but they're also the ones that are most likely to face that challenge that Sam highlights. How do we overcome that?
I think it's a real genuine challenge. So far what we've seen is we have remote learners in pretty rural areas, and generally speaking, the connection is strong enough for them to be able to successfully engage in these classes, but these are video calls with a lot of students, so you've got to have some internet connection. In some cases, we do things like send recordings of classes, make them accessible if students have got a connection glitch during class. But I think the key thing is we need, high quality internet across these areas. And so to some extent, this can be solved by, government investing in, fiber rollouts in more rural areas, etc. But we are, legitimately constrained, by, if there's rural areas that have, poor internet quality. Within ANZ, this does happen in some parts of the region, but at least there's still been, concerted government effort to roll out, stronger internet to rural areas. But in countries we're in, like South Africa, this is quite a genuine issue in some parts of the country.
And Wayne, you've some of the assessment tools that you've developed are able to work and provide assessment tools in limited connectivity environments. Can you tell us a little bit about how that all works?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess one of the rules or requirements for being able to build national assessments is that those national assessments need to be able to run and work equitably in any school environment where those assessments are running. I mean, we're the technology team that has built the NAPLAN platform, for example, in Australia. So that's got to work just as effectively in a Sydney school as it does in a school in regional Northern Territory. So in some cases, what we're able to do is have technology that sort of caches the test on the devices or close to the devices, and then allows the test taking to be the same experience, regardless of whether they're in a centre which has got intermittent internet access compared to to an inner city school. I think we're seeing some really interesting technology coming out now with the use of, say, for example, the Skynet technology from Elon Musk. There's going to be a lot more opportunity to be able to connect schools with high quality internet in the next 10 years, I think, regardless of where you are. So it's not always just the internet that's going to be the problem that we need to solve in that respect, but it's certainly a lot of progress is being made in that area as well.
Plenty to look forward to, hopefully. Excellent. John, I'd like to bring you in for Peter's question. Peter asks, in what ways should we be sharpening professional learning for teachers so that we can properly or more effectively deliver learning and assessment?
Well, again, I'd go back to last year and comment on what happened. Like last year, I saw more teachers talking to each other about the problems they're having, the problems of practice, the problems of students, the problems of content, the problems of assessment. That doesn't typically happen in many schools. You go to the staff room to talk about the curriculum or the assessment or the kids, not about your teaching. So I think learning from that about how we can create professional learning experiences where there is that collective high expectation that you can make a difference to all kids, where you can share those problems of kids, where you can share what your concepts of a year's growth for a year's input looks like. Like teachers who have low expectations, sadly, are very successful. And so how do you get that professional learning around that? Like I'm at the stage where I couldn't care less how anyone teaches. I think that's a discussion that we've had far too much that hasn't helped us a lot. I care about the impact of their teaching. And we heard about that last year in COVID. You didn't get teachers coming together and said, oh, I ran this program using this app, or I did this. The question was, well, what effect did it have? Did it get kids engaged? Did it get them moving along? That's the kind of professional learning. And I think we need the sector itself using the power of social media, kind of like TripAdvisor, to be much more involved in rating the quality of the impact of professional learning. And then I think we'll open a dramatic, more positive way of doing it than we have at the moment, where you go along for a day, you sit there, you listen to someone talk for 10 hours, and you go back to your class and do what you did yesterday. I'm a great fan of professional learning. Surely, if we expect kids to come to school and that's the place to learn, it's the same for teachers. And so I think it can make a big difference as long as the focus is on what do we mean by impact, how do we maximize it, and how do we get teachers to have high expectations for all kids.
John, I'll go to you again with a question from Linda. I'm going to augment it a tiny bit here. Is online also an opportunity to expand the peer networks that teachers can access?
Oh, look, we did a survey a few years ago at AITSL of induction into a school, and 95% of principals claimed they had an excellent induction system, of which less than 40% of the teachers knew about. So improving induction that way is going to make no difference. So we created an app. And any teacher in their first couple of years can go onto that app, ask a question, ask for help. By the afternoon, 10 or 12 highly accomplished lead teachers have responded to them. 20,000 hits a month. There's probably more induction in Australia happening outside schools than in schools, and many school leaders didn't even know it's happening. Now, that's just one example. Harness that power of the generosity of teachers to work with each other about these kinds of problems. And I think this is going to be probably the biggest impact of technology on teaching when we start to do that. And remember, I said earlier, they're already huge users of social media. And we get 1/3 hits to our website a month. I ran a Twitter night in New South Wales last year. We had 100,000 on that Twitter night on a Tuesday night. Now, this is the power of teachers. How do we unleash that? They are the best teachers of each other, professional learning. And I think, yes, I think you've hit it on the head. That's when technology is going to make a dramatic difference. Now, we all know there's good and bad social media. So we have to make sure there's a good quality control in there too.
I can vouch for some great social media conversations, particularly Twitter. There's some very energetic teachers out there that are constantly talking about practice. So it's absolutely right. Jamie, I'd like to bring you in on Fiona's question. Fiona asks, is there an optimum balance for online and face-to-face time? So with Crimson, you mentioned that many of the students choose a blended path. What do you think is the right balance there? Is it matter for different subjects that are better suited online? What's the sort of finding that you hear from students and the teachers in your network?
So I think quite a powerful example here is the evolution in MBAs and what some of the findings have been around delivery for MBAs. So what some, delivery mechanisms have found, like Johns Hopkins University, is 1 or 2 deep in-person days actually does a lot of the, deep social interaction development and the relationship building that then lets the online channels work quite effectively. If you just have a sort of online school full of strangers who haven't met before physically or have no physical interaction, that can slow down the rate of friendship formation quite a lot. So how I think about it is it's not necessarily a by subject thing, but I think it's more deep quality social interaction. So for example, our kids do things like escape rooms once every 2 months. So they meet up physically in Auckland and they do this collaborative, intensive problem solving thing followed by like a fun movie night, different activities like this, where they're actually really engaging in a strong interpersonal way. I think if you sit in like a traditional say chemistry lecture with 30 students and kids in the back row on their phone and people aren't really participating much in class, it's a lecture style method, you're not getting much out of that social interaction. So I don't think you need a huge amount of physical interaction, but you need good quality ones when it's being done. Sport, for example, fantastic. Things like theatre productions, orchestra, which requires, careful interaction, I'm a big advocate for. So I do think, blended is the correct answer for most learners, but I wouldn't necessarily say you should be banking on the, physical school classroom experience for that social interaction.
So a lot of the enrolments that are driven to Crimson are around maths. Is there something about maths that makes it better suited to that online environment?
Yes, definitely. So math is a subject where it is quite modular and students can accelerate quite rapidly through math, building on previous knowledge. And that's, I think, harder to achieve in humanities subjects, where it can take a while for one's maturity to be able to engage with some of these deeper themes you might explore into English literature. But with math, people are able to really dig quite deep. And if they are untethered from the school restrictions on kind of ability by age, they can kind of really get 2-3 years ahead quite consistently. So a funny story, I'll give you. One of my students who just got in from Shanghai to Harvard, when he was 16, he was working on the multivariable calculus that I did at Harvard in my second year. And math is one of my strong areas. So I think there's massive differentials around the world in acceleration in math, and allowing kids to just move through this at the fastest possible pace for them is a great way to kind of keep them engaged and also unlock more STEM capacity.
Well, in the meantime, though, I'd like to go to Wayne again and talk a little bit more about the opportunities and frontiers, and particularly around assessment. Of course, there's a lot of discussion about the potential for AI and some of those applications around assessment. What do you see as the game changer in terms of making, I guess, truly personalised assessments and highly adaptive tools? How do we see that promise comes to life?
Well, I think we've seen already some exploration of some areas such as collaborative and problem-solving styled assessments. That those things have been around for a little while. We haven't really seen them fully make them into the sort of the main assessments that are offered around. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in that, but there's also a lot of opportunity in sort of taking that a few steps further forward as well, which is really about building and designing more authentic assessments, ones that give test candidates the opportunity to demonstrate the skills and knowledge in more real-world environments. So I think there's going to be a lot more effort seen in that area over the next few years. technologies like augmented reality can offer a huge amount of opportunity to build new types of assessments. I'm looking forward to seeing how this technology will be integrated into some of those authentic assessments in the future as well. And you mentioned AI, Glenn. I think there's still a huge amount of promise from AI as well. We've generated a huge set of data corpuses from various different areas around relating to student measurement over the last 10 years. So that data is really incredibly valuable and will be able to be used to drive the creation of new tools using AI, whether they be things like being able to automate the development of item creation, which is quite a manual process and one that requires quite a lot of trialing and analytics to make sure it works correctly. AI has got a lot of potential being able to work in that area and to reduce the amount of time that it takes to create items and to be able to produce more interesting items. Also, response scoring and data analytics, AI has got a huge role to play there as well. So I think there's quite a lot of different areas where we're going to see advancement in assessment technology from those perspectives.
Slightly different answer here to Wayne on that. My experience in the measurement area, like if you want a teacher to create a test, they can do it in 5 minutes, 2 minutes. Now, it may not be any good, but they can and they do. And I think that all the attention to that side, and we've seen virtual reality come in, the effect sizes are so low from all that kind of stuff, it's not going to make a difference. The biggest change in measurement is going to come where the systems, the IT systems, can help in the interpretation of what it means having done measurement, how we can look at that trajectory over time. You ask at the moment, how do schools and how do kids monitor their progress over time? It's extremely limited. And there's quite a lot of sophisticated psychometrics involved in doing that, which a machine could do. How do we get that interpretation of that back to the student, back to the kids, back to the parents about where they go next? When you ask kids, what kind of feedback do they want? They want feedback that helps them where to go next. They don't get it so often in the regular classroom. It's all about how you're going and where have you been, but that where to next. And that's going to be an incredible asset to teachers when they have that extra assistance to help do that interpretation. If a test ends up with a number and sits on the classroom floor, it helps no one. But I think the technology is going to make a huge difference on that side of the equation.
I agree, John. I think, as I was saying, the data corpuses that we have are really what can help drive that too. Like we need to be able to use the data that we have collected historically to be able to provide better perspective to students.
Schools are just full of data, Wayne. We don't need more data.
No, I'm not saying we need more data, but we need to use that data more effectively. We need to use that data and take that data and actually find value in it where we haven't been finding value up to now. And that's where I think AI can come in. And I think it's an important point you make too about how that data is presented back to students as well. I noticed in the chat, for example, someone was asking a question about our PISA results and why our PISA results are not improving. That, and I think you made a comment about a couple of the reasons why that's the case. I think we could also link the comment that you were making around presenting the data back to students. One of the comments, because we work with the OECD now in I don't know, maybe 16, 17 different countries with the PISA for Schools program that we work in. And one of the things I hear as a big difference between some countries like Australia, where our results aren't improving, and other countries where the results are improving, is the way the students perceive assessment and the way they perceive their role, I guess, in that process. So in some countries, students will walk in incredibly proud that they're involved in an assessment and that they're going to do the best that they possibly can as an outcome. I think we don't see that behaviour in schools in Australia as much as what it is in other countries. And to your point, being able to help students understand the data and to be able to find value in what an assessment has provided back to them could make a difference in the way they behave in the future.
Sean, so teachers are time poor. There's a lot of information. They're awash with data. How do you streamline that so that it's useful and can plug into instruction and that information piece? Are there some good examples that you're aware of?
Well, yeah, I mentioned the Astral tool that is entirely based about the interpretation. It's based on good assessment, but the focus isn't on that. I think the way in which we look at what the formative assessment's trying to do to look at trajectory of kids over time. I really like the tools out there that help teachers moderate what their their assessments are, and in the process of doing that, they hear the expectations of other teachers. And this is all done through the technologies that are available. We do a lot of standard setting workshops now to help teachers involved in the setting of those standards. And I think these are all the exciting. And the other thing with kids, like you watch them on their iPhones. Like here we are talking about getting kids on iPads and computers. They've passed that. They're on their phones. They use that extensively. And you look at the way they do assessment. It's all about the reporting. If Angry Birds didn't have a good reporting system, we wouldn't use it. I think this is where we've got to learn from those systems to captivate kids. They want the challenge of learning and going up series of steps to get better and better. They don't care what the end goal is. I remember years ago, I actually got to the end of one of the Mario Brothers games and was shocked that there was an end and disappointed because I wanted to keep playing. I wanted to keep learning. But in schools, we do the opposite. We say to kids, hand it in, good work, away you go. I think we can learn from social media and from the gaming industry how we can make schooling so much more exciting.
Just building on that point around the gaming industry,
sure.
really quickly. For some context, take a game like Call of Duty. There's, all of these different levels that students, players can go down. Every weapon you unlock, there's different attachments you can unlock. There's all these different streams and formats. The sophistication that people have as far as all these little missions students chase keeps them running for hours and hours and hours with their peers. Obviously, too much gamification won't be good, and it will be counterintuitive to learning outcomes. But even a little bit of gamification, like for example, giving you a badge if you turn up to class 10 days row on time. Having a high score streak if you answer a whole question in class right, several times in a row. Maybe a badge for helping your peer, in an inter-classroom environment, or if you propose an idea that fosters a discussion with your classmates, getting a badge for this. So there's small things you can do and take from the online gaming world that can be applied in moderation, I think, quite successfully to make the traditional school experience a bit more inspiring for students.
Jamie, let me stay with you on this. Let's look forward a little bit here. Is online schooling something that could be a mainstream option as a really disruptive force in education more broadly, or is it something that will remain an option on the side for some kids?
So I guess first of all, it's quite interesting in that online schooling prior to COVID was very regionally bifurcated in who used it. So in America, it's been widely used now for the best part of 20 years, growing at about an 8 to 9% annual growth rate. The US has high homeschooling communities and also broadly has quite a school choice movement. And there was both strong private support. So schools like the Stanford Online High School, Elon Musk, I think, had a kid there, for example, top 5 academic school in the US and fully online. And then you've got groups like K-12, government-funded groups that have 300,000 students across the country servicing remote communities. So for a while, I think, even ignoring COVID, the main barrier to online schooling around the world was just the lack of regulatory support, the lack of awareness of this as an option. I think COVID sort of thrust it into the public debate. And so I would imagine what's going to happen is, for, first of all, the part-time option, it will grow. For rural communities, it will become, very popular. What's the point in spending a lot of money on an expensive boarding school, moving, far from home if that's not what you want, when you can have better quality instruction online? And then, for some types of learners in traditional, city areas, they'll prefer online too, but it won't be the average learner. It will probably be, a powerful minority. So I think this is definitely an option that is here to stay. And it also provides governments a compelling alternative to trying to run, quite uneconomical schools in rural locations as well. So I think here to stay, and at the least, will probably proxy towards the US's rate of adoption pre-COVID. But I imagine, based on some of these COVID trends around things like remote work also, it should probably accelerate beyond that quite considerably.
Just note that Ontario has announced that it's allowing any school who wants to go online can do, any school can do it. England is, in the last couple of days, are looking at the same notion. I think, Jamie, that homeschooling will stop being a novelty and an exception. It will become the norm. But my argument is that I think you can do both. You can do the distance learning within a regular school and learn dramatically from how you do that. So I think that hybrid notion is something that we also look forward to.
How do we do that then, John? So is it a matter that you enroll in a school and you get supplementary almost tutoring from the online option? The online option, or
you've got to be careful there, because I noticed that came through in the chat too. Like, I'm not a fan of the individualization, the personalization of it, because kids learn in groups, and employers want students, graduates that can work in groups and be team players. And as Jamie, I'm sure, could point out, that happens. I'm like, look what you do on the chat. You are talking with us now. Some of you are asking questions that you probably would never ask in a larger audience. And so there's a whole different kind of dynamic that happens using these kind of methods. And I can see that you can use that in the regular class. Like, here's a problem that Jamie has to confront. If you don't have kids in a regular school, who babysits? Now, I think schools are bigger than that. And that's one of the, and as we want two parents to be employed now, I think there is still a role for the regular place called school. There's still a role for the oversight and surveillance, looking kids in the eyes. So I think it's not one or the other. I think there's a massive mixture. I noticed the enormous success in England of the Oak Academy, where teachers could download videos, get the kids to do that through their COVID teaching, and then the teachers spent their time teaching, not preparing. What a difference it's going to make to workload if we get it right.
So let me also, Jamie, you've hinted a little bit there that there was some hurdles for you in terms of adoption and scaling up of online schooling. What are some of those hurdles? Is it a regulation issue?
First of all, to build an effective online school, I think you can't just take a physical school and switch it online. I think there's unique competencies required to be able to, use the digital tools, create effective online content, use a variety of the different ed tech tools coming out actually effectively in the classroom. You need a culture amongst the teachers of wanting to kind of adapt and utilize these various tools effectively. You need students that are signing up for the expectations of the community. So I think first and foremost, you can't just take a physical school, switch it online, and expect good results, which is why I think there'll be dedicated online school providers, and they'll continue to be fantastic physical schools, and they'll work together in blended capacity in various ways. So I think that's the first part. There's a competency requirement, I think, to make this work effectively. The second thing is regulatory for sure. So, it was, quite a fantastical journey that John Morris and I went on in New Zealand to get this approval to launch Crimson Global Academy in NZ. And hopefully, now post-COVID, for other folks, it won't be as difficult as the journey we went on. But I do think, there is still a, regulatory need for support there that will, grow and understanding as this becomes more mainstream and other governments kind of adopt and follow the kind of early trends in, say, the US.
Can I comment there, Glenn, that here in Australia at the moment, 25% plus of all teachers and teacher education courses are doing it completely online, and there's no reason to not believe they're not high quality.
Yeah, just building on that point, there's a really interesting trend in the US with online university degrees. So like 1 in 5, I think maybe 1 in 4 now online university degrees in America are online. And actually, there's lots of high school students that are, better candidates for effective online learning than, an adult who's retraining, for example, who's less familiar with some of these, online environments. So I think if you look at the adoption of online at tertiary, it's a good kind of proxy for what may happen if you kind of, turn things forward a couple of dials within K-12.
John, not all teachers have always been open to technology over the years, and probably it's true that some are still skeptical about its use in the classroom. How do we overcome that? How do we ensure that doesn't become an obstacle?
Well, every teacher, I would argue, came into the profession for one reason. They want to have a positive impact on their kids. And so when you start to see the evidence that teaching in a particular way that involves technology can improve and increase and enhance that impact on kids, you're more likely to use it. But so often, teachers are told you have to use technology because technology is good. It's the way of the future. That's what kids are doing. No one's going to be turned on by that. Technology requires a different way of thinking, a different kind of resourcing. And teachers have to see the added impact before they're prepared to put in that investment. And some do, but that speed of doing it's been too slow. Again, COVID has been the disruptor. COVID has been the golden ticket, where teachers have seen technologies like television, it's like fountain pens or barrows. It's our technology. But there are extremely effective and efficient and equitable uses of the technology that can augment what you're doing. It can happen in your regular classroom. It can improve your impact on kids. So I'm a great fan that if you focus on that impact, you're going to get more teachers to start saying, well, how can we use these technologies? And again, I want to overemphasize that incredible power of social media, of kids working with each other, thinking aloud over social media that they don't do in the regular classroom, listening to the teacher solving problems, which doesn't happen in the regular classroom as much as it should do. So I think this is the kind of advocacy we need to be doing, but please not go back to that old-fashioned argument that IT is going to make the difference. It hasn't for 50 years for much. It's not going to the next 50 years, but it can really increase the impact on kids, their way of social interaction, their community, and get them much more excited about this place called school.
Wayne, Janison doesn't just do tools like NAPLAN, it's a wide set of platforms. Is there a role there that within the network at Janison, that there's options or alternatives to help to help get that message out and coordinate the work for teachers that can help share those lessons and make their work easier ultimately?
Look, I think there's many different technology companies that have that as their goal. I mean, Janison's been an organisation that's worked in education and technology for 22 years. And when we started the business 22 years ago, obviously technology was much more limited than what it is now. Web browsers were quite sort of basic systems, and there were very few opportunities to sort of be quite disruptive. But we spent all of our time building technology for learning platforms for the first 15 years of our organisation's existence, and we had many great examples of good impact in schools and in universities and in corporates. As an organisation now, we do focus on assessment, mainly because we've decided that this is a particular area that we can work in and that we can have a global impact in what we do by concentrating on that particular area. I think I absolutely support the development of other types of technologies in the learning space, in the teaching spaces, in the creative spaces as well. But I guess from our perspective, what we sort of understand is that it's good to concentrate on one area that you're good at and to be able to sort of deliver tools and capabilities that are really going to be transformative and impactful. So from our perspective, we focus very much on assessment, because at the time that we started that work, we saw that there was basically no one in that space, no one delivering digital assessment. And we stepped in at that point back in 2010 and started to work on it. So Janison's probably unlikely to go back into the learning space and start to deliver tools for improved learning, because we're really very much on a pathway which is focused on how can we make assessments better. But that said, as I said, I think there are great opportunities for lots of organisations that are working in these different technologies. And definitely I see that teachers are up for the challenge of taking on those sorts of technologies and applying them in the classroom as well.
We're just about out of time, and thanks to everyone that's been part of the conversation. And apologies we haven't been able to get to everyone's questions here. I'd like to just do a round with our panellists just before we wrap up, really succinctly, for what the future looks like to you. Jamie, I want to go to you first here. What's the future look like from your end?
I think the future is blended learning, where a student can, be born in any corner of the world, can learn with a community of peers from different borders, go through school based on their ability within each individual subject, and also have perspective from a network of career professionals as well to help form an earlier view of what career pathways they can best pursue. A global model here also helps to deal with local labour shortages and things like computer science instruction, and create a schooling system that's really fit for purpose and equipped to release these ambitious young people onto the world stage.
Wayne, over to you. What does the future look like?
I think there's there's an opportunity for more effective assessments where the data that we collect by those assessments can be even more purposeful and improve outcomes. And that's something that we're really focused on. I don't think it necessarily means that we build more high stakes assessments. I think we'll see better integrated formative assessments and increasing use of low and mid stakes assessments, which sort of don't stress our students out as much, but allow them to focus on why they're being assessed and what will be the outcomes from those assessments. And I also see that there's going to be a shift towards assessments which use a sample of students rather than a census of students or all of the students. That's also going to help to reduce the stress levels for students in the future. So I think across all those areas, we see digital assessments continuing to play a major role in education.
And John, bring us home here. What does the future hold? And I suppose to ask the question that you put pointedly in a paper recently, can education technology finally deliver?
Well, here's the bad news. The future is more of the same. If we've learned anything from calamities like COVID, we rush back to the old normal. There are hierarchies in school that support the whole normal. There are winners from the previous system who want to support the old normal. So the sad fact is that if we learn nothing from COVID, then I think we're in a much more miserable place. Here's the good news. The kids are going to create their futures. So we better get out of their way.
Very good. Look, that's all we have time for today. To be continued, I'm sure. From everyone here at the CIS, a big thank you to Jamie, Wayne and John for what was a great discussion. Thanks everyone for joining us. For decades, the CIS has been a fiercely independent voice, working hard to promote sound liberal principles. To be notified of our future videos, make sure you subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. We rely solely on the generosity of people like you for donations to advance our cause. Check out the links on screen now to see how you can get involved.